Hi lovely booktubers, I'm Debs. Welcome back to my channel, Raina Reads Stuff. I am here in the book shack. It's been a beautiful day today. My voice is starting to come back, much to the disappointment of my husband, but at least it means I can do my Sunday weekly reading wrap up. So, without further ado, let's get on with it. Summer of Sport starts now, yesterday, and as part of Summer of Sport, which I'm co-hosting, I read this, The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner by Arron. There was another reason I read this too. As many of you may know, I live in Nottingham. Nottingham is a UNESCO City of Literature, and I'm investigating why. Arron is one of Nottingham's famous literary sons. This is a book of short stories, and they're not all sport related. And even the ones that are, one of them is tenuous. Arron writes gritty, working class stories. He is arguably most famous for Saturday Night, Sunday Morning, which is written in the vernacular. There's a lot of local dialect in these, but not quite as much. The titular story, The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner, is about a lad who's gone to Borstal. He's 17. He got caught stealing. Well, he'd burgled a bakery. But while he's in Borstal, it's discovered that he's a good long-distance runner, and the guy in charge of the Borstal desperately wants him to win an inter-Borstal long-distance event. During his runs, which he's allowed to do unaccompanied, he keeps coming back, he doesn't run away, he mulls over his life of crime to date and thinks about what he might do in the future. This was made into a film. I've not seen that film. I've seen Saturday Night, Sunday Morning, but I haven't seen The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner. The rest of the books in here also deal with the plight of the working classes in the East Midlands. And another one of them, The Match, also deals with sport. Specifically, it deals with Notts County playing Bristol City and losing at home. And the effect that has on supporters and how they react to that. They're all, I love these. These short stories are great. They're well worth a read. They're very, very East Midlands. It would help if you knew the local dialect, I think. Anyway, that was book number one. Book number two, I've become completely addicted to DelphiClassics.com. I downloaded I've downloaded many, to be fair, but the complete works of Frances Hodgson Burnett, and I read A Little Princess. I tend to read children's books. I mean, I love classic children's literature, but I tend to read it almost as a sorbet between courses. And I had read last month an inordinate amount of horror stories. And I just wanted something to clear the decks before I start on this month's reading projects. So I've read A Little Princess many times before. I don't think it's as good as The Secret Garden. But like I say, it's a good palate cleanser. Now, I was looking for westerns. I was looking on Project Gutenberg. Excuse me. And as I said the other day in a video, sort of fell down a rabbit hole. Found some cowboy poetry. One poet was recommended to me by Jim at Mystery and Mayhem. And the other I found by looking at Project Gutenberg. So I read this one by Robert W. Service. The Spell of the Yukon and Other Verses. Service. I suppose you don't think of Canada as Western. I'm sorry, I've got such a tickly throat. But they were riding the ranges in Western Canada in the same way as they were in Western United States. A lot of Robert Service's poetry is available on Project Gutenberg free, which is where I got it from. I think I've downloaded about 4 of them. And these are great. I am loving this poetry. It's very descriptive of the natural world. As you would expect, wide open spaces, big skies, mountains. But I am loving these. The other one I came across is called Sun and Saddle Leather. It's by a guy called Badger Clark, which, although it is a nickname, is just a great name. He was the cowboy poet, and he was the first poet laureate of South Dakota. He most famously wrote The Cowboy Prayer, which I think I might do as a Poetry Thursday this week, if you want to hear some of his work. The other thing about this book is the illustrations are included, and the illustrations, don't know if you can see there, are photographs taken by a pioneer of photography called Leighton Alton Huffman, L.A. Huffman. And both Badger Clark and L.A. Huffman are in the Western Hall of Fame. Huffman appears to have documented cowboys out on the range just working, but the pictures are magnificent, and it's well worth downloading this book just to look at the photographs, although I really did enjoy the poetry. I've got some more cowboy poetry that I will be reading, and I'm looking forward to those. Now, I have also read this week for Readathon, or rather, I finished it this week, a book called Lost Christianities, and this is by Bart D. Ehrman. There we go. This was a buddy read with Vin at Revenant Reads and Stephanie Cohen. I am due to discuss it with them in precisely 25 minutes, but they won't watch this before then. So this I read for Maybe Midrash, which is a reading event that where people look at serious studies about religion. Now, I am not religious, but I am fascinated by religion. This book is subtitled The Battles for Scripture and Faiths We Never Knew. And it is about how the modern version of Christianity came to be the accepted version. There were, and I had no idea about this, there were loads of different groups who thought they had Christianity pinned down. And many of those disappeared into oblivion. You had a group that believed that Jesus had a twin brother who was human. You had a group that believed there were two gods, not one. And it looks at documentary evidence, ancient texts, or copies of ancient texts, to see what these different sects of Christianity believed and why they disappeared. And I found this fascinating. It also deals with the possibility of forgeries and why the books in the New Testament were the ones selected and what happened to the others. This was really interesting. It was right up my street. It was all about ancient parchments, and it was fascinating. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I think... Oh, no, it's not. I thought that was all of the books that I'd read and completed. But there is one more. And it's not going to let me look at it. Oh, yes, it is. Sorry. It's Dune on the Range. I'm reading Cowboys. I thought I'd start with a classic. I only started reading Westerns last year during Garb August, and I think that was the big surprise for me for Garb August. I absolutely loved them. I bought loads. I read several more during Garb August 2.5 in February. Now I've got some Louis L'Amour, I've got some Zane Grey, but I also want to read classic westerns. And so I've spent a fair amount of time looking on various lists that claim to have the top 10 or the top 20 westerns ever written. On all of these, without exception, was Shane by Jack Schaeffer. So I read that yesterday. It is wonderful. I absolutely loved it. It's told through the eyes of a young lad called Bob, who lives with his parents in Wyoming. And one day, a stranger rides into town, and Bob notices him because he's well dressed, and he just looks a bit mysterious. He stops at their homestead and asks if he can water the horse and himself. Bob's father asks him to stay, And long story short, he ends up working with Bob's father as a sort of farmhand, really, helping him around the homestead. There is a rancher the other side of town who wants various homesteaders to pack up and leave so he can open up his ranch again. And he's not fussy about what means he uses. This was written... No, it's not. Oh yes, it is going to tell me. This was written in 1949. There's a film starring Alan Ladd, which I saw many moons ago, I haven't seen since. But I absolutely loved this. Obviously, there's lots of other events going on this summer, so I am well into the first part of the first book of Dune, for Dune in June. That's by Frank Herbert. My book trek, The Wrath of the Summer of Star Trek, for the science element of the challenge, I am reading Science Logs by Andre Bormanis. I said his name completely wrong the other day. Ignore that, it's Bormanis. He was a science consultant on Star Trek, and these science logs explain different scientific principles from Star Trek and the real science behind them. It's quite interesting. I think I'll take this in bits and pieces over the whole month. And then another one I'm taking in bits and pieces. This is Jan Stragling's More Than a Game. And this is about, well, it says when sport and history collide. This is about sporting events that had a wider impact than just sport. So far, I've read an incredible story about an Aboriginal cricket team who visited England in 1868. They literally had to be smuggled out of Australia because in those days Aboriginal people needed to get a pass to leave their state from the government, and the government wouldn't give it, so they smuggled them out of the state and then bunged them on a ship for a few months to get to England. One sadly died, two became very ill and had to be sent home, but it's just an incredible story about how this Aboriginal cricket team came to England to play the English. Then there's a very interesting story about Jim Jeffries and Jack Johnson and a heavyweight boxing bout in 1910, where Jim Jeffries actually came out of retirement because Jack Johnson had won the heavyweight title, and racism being rife at the time, people enticed him out of retirement just so he could beat the black guy. Then we have more racism in the Olympics, 1936 in Berlin. Hitler is telling anybody who'll listen about the supremacy of the Aryan race when Jesse Owens turns up, along with a number of other black Americans, and Jesse Owens wins 4 gold medals. He won gold medals in the long jump, 100 and 200 metres in the relay. Most people know that story, But reading to the end of the chapter, Jesse Owens wasn't lauded as the other athletes were when he returned to the US. In fact, there were celebrations, but at the end of the celebrations, he wasn't allowed to use the lift to go up to his floor in the hotel room because it was whites only. It's an interesting story. We also have, this chapter is called Pride and Prejudice, so we go on to Joe Louis. We're boxing again, Joe Louis and Max Schmeling. And Max Schmeling becomes an unofficial Nazi poster boy without ever wanting to. And in fact, in later life became a great friend of Joe Louis. There is the Salute to Black Power at the Mexico Olympics in 1968. And that is the very famous photograph. This book's really interesting. I'm enjoying it, and like I say, it's another bite-sized chunk one that I'll be dipping into and out of throughout the month. The other thing I've started is I'm doing a group read of Ulysses. This is hosted by Greg at Another Bibliophile Reads and Al at Big Hard Book and Classics. How am I getting on? It's not easy. It's not easy, and I've struggled with a few things, but I'm going to persevere. I have a very good companion, The Guide to James Joyce's Ulysses by Patrick Hastings, which is extremely useful. And also doing this as a group read I think is going to be useful as well. So that's me for this week. I don't feel as though I've achieved a huge amount, mainly because I've been full of cold most of the week. My audiobook for next week, I didn't travel down to see my grandson this week because I didn't want to germ him, even though he gave me the germs in the first place. But this week I've got an acclaimed audiobook. It's True Grit by Charles Portis, and it's the version that's narrated by Donna Tartt. Everybody who's spoken about this says it's wonderful, so I'm very much looking forward to that. So that's it for me for this week. I hope you've had a really good week. I hope the sun is shining where you are and you've got very excellent reading fodder. Thank you for popping by. I will speak to you again soon, and bye for now.